The Seattle Kraken have officially hired Lane Lambert as the third ever head coach in Kraken history. Is that a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Or do we just kind of have to wait to find out?
You are Locked On Kraken, your daily podcast on the Seattle Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, Seattle hockey fans, welcome to another episode of Locked On Kraken, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where we bring you your favorite team, the Seattle Kraken, every single day. Erica L. Ayala here, in addition to being your host of Locked On Kraken, formerly host of Locked On Women's Basketball. I am currently a writer and analyst, on-air analyst for CBS Sports, primarily talking about women's basketball and occasionally the National Hockey League. Before we get into the news of today, I want to let you know today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. And you can head over to FanDuel as a new customer and get $200 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Okay, now listen, we talked about Lane Lambert on yesterday's show. We've talked about Lane Lambert in prior shows. And now he's our guy. So we got to know everything we need to know about him. I'm going to take you to two clips. One is a shorter clip. Another is from our network, the Locked On Islanders show with Gil Martin. And we're going to get a sense for what's going on with Lane Lambert here. But first, we'll start with the actual announcement. What is Seattle saying about this move? Well, I've got quotes. After conducting an extensive search, we're thrilled to announce Lane as our new head coach, said Seattle General Manager Jason Botterill. We cast a wide net for suitable candidates. Lane impressed us throughout the interview process with his strategy and vision for this team. He's found success at every level as a coach and player and was an integral part of Washington's Cup run in 2018. We have full confidence in his ability to lead our players behind the bench. Now, mentioned 2018. Now, Lane Lambert was an assistant coach with the Capitals. He was an assistant and associate coach for the Islanders before taking over as head coach for a little while there. And he was most recently an assistant with the Toronto Maple Leafs. So again, this is the piece most recent, and it goes into the clip that we're going to hear in a little bit. Lambert, 60, joins the Kraken after spending the past season as an associate coach with the Toronto Maple Leafs. He helped guide the team to a first-place finish in the Atlantic Division with a 52-26-4 record, 108 points. I mean, yeah, the Seattle Kraken will absolutely take that. Also had the 8th best mark for goals allowed per game, 2.79, tied with Washington. Again, he's been with the Islanders. He also has ties to the Nashville Predators through Barry Trotz, but also has been a coach in the American Hockey League, the Milwaukee Admirals, as an assistant and head coach, led them to 2 Western Division titles, served as an assistant coach for the Bridgeport Sound Tigers during the 05-06 campaign. So Lane Lambert has been around. He has been around in the past 11 seasons alone in the National Hockey League. Now, I'm going to play you a clip from Steve Dangle. I'm going to play you a clip from Gil Martin. In the Steve Dangle clip in particular, that episode is about, from the Toronto Maple Leafs perspective, about bringing in Lane Lambert and why he's a pretty good guy as an assistant. Now, Gil Martin, of course, has the insight onto why it didn't work out for Lane Lambert as a head coach in the National Hockey League. And so, interesting, not sure we can take either one and completely apply it to what Lane Lambert is going to do for Seattle, but I do think there are interesting things to discuss that come up on both of these clips. Well, that's why I'm playing them, because I think they're interesting and I think they provide some insight. But again, The big storyline for me is not as much about the coach as it is about the front office. And interestingly enough, one of these two clips that you're going to hear alludes to some of that. And I think it's really interesting. Let's talk about it coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. As I mentioned, today's episode of Locked On Kraken brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. The NBA playoffs, Stanley Cup playoffs, WNBA regular season, MLB, and so much more is in full swing. That means every night delivers highlight-worthy performances. I've been watching the Women's Softball World Series, 2 walk-offs today. Fantastic. Major momentum shifts, can't miss moments, all happening. And whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. New to FanDuel? No problem. It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. And thanks, as always, for being a part of the Locked On Podcast Network. As someone who listens first listen every day, an everydayer, an OGer, and of course, a Locked On Kraken listener and viewer. Hello, YouTube folks. Lane Lambert, it's official. Talked about Lane on yesterday's episode, talked about him a few times in the last handful of episodes. He is officially our guy. Didn't talk about this in the first segment, but let me give you a quote from him about the Seattle Kraken. I'm so excited to become the head coach of the Seattle Kraken. When it came time to writing a new chapter, I couldn't think of a better fit. Seattle's an incredible sports town, and I've been impressed by the energy of the fans every time I've been there as a visiting coach. This team has a talented group of young players poised to take the next step and a core group of veterans with great leadership qualities. I'd like to thank Samantha Holloway, Ron Francis, and Jason Botterill for this opportunity. I can't wait to get started. So that's what Lane is saying. We'll hear from Lane Lambert next week. The date and time tentative, but I will keep you posted, of course, here. And I want to take you back. I mentioned that we're going to talk, or we have a few clips to play from today's episode to get a sense. I don't know Lane Lambert very well, and I'm okay with that and sharing that. But let's go to some expertise. So Steve Dangle reacting to Lane Lambert being hired by Toronto. And I wanted to come to this clip because I think it gives an interesting perspective on a group of people that maybe, like myself, don't really know much about Lane Lambert and maybe why he's a good choice. And it was interesting to hear what Steve Dangle had to say. So let me play you a snippet and then we'll talk about it.
Let's just look at the numbers for the teams that Lambert had as an associate or an assistant coach for the last 2 teams he's been with. The Predators, he hasn't been with them in 10 years. But the Capitals and Islanders, while Lambert's been there, were incredible, especially on the defensive end and especially on the penalty kill. Lane Lambert's tenure with the Washington Capitals spanned from the 2014-15 season to the 17-18 season, the year the Capitals won the Stanley Cup. Over the course of those years with the Capitals were the second best team in the entire NHL in terms of goals against. They allowed the second fewest goals against. They had the 6th fewest shots against, and they had the 6th ranked penalty kill. Over that span, they were also 4th in terms of goals for. Put an asterisk on it, though, because one of the teams ahead of them is the Vegas Golden Knights, who only played 1 season over that span. So you could argue they were 3rd. 3rd amongst teams that played all the games anyway. Shots for, 24th, which I found alarming, but okay. But here, this will make you feel better. In terms of wins, they were 1st over that span by a margin of 13 wins over the second best team. And in terms of points, they were 1st by a margin of 26. Oh, and they won the President's Trophy in 2017 and then the Stanley Cup in 2018. The Capitals were quite good when Lane Lambert was there. Yeah, all right, well, that's the Capitals. What about the Islanders? What about the Islanders? I know a lot of Islanders fans don't love Lane Lambert because of how he was as a head coach, or rather how his tenure went, and then he was fired for Patrick Roy. And wow, that's a really interesting name. Holy crap, Patrick Roy. And then they did better and they made the playoffs, and why wouldn't they like Patrick Roy? And why wouldn't they think Lane Lambert is the problem? Well, the reason I brought up Berube having all this experience, throughout the bench, and Sheldon Keefe being a head coach guy who's always a head coach, maybe Lane Lambert is just a really, really, really good sidekick. Like maybe he's just a really, really, really good assistant or associate coach. Proof is in the pudding. He's won a bunch of games. He's got a Stanley Cup. Maybe he's just not meant to be a head coach. Almost feels unfair. He's only had a season and a half at it with a team that was mid. Let's be honest, they were mid. Here's how the New York Islanders performed between the 2018-19 season and the 2021-22 season. That's when Lane Lambert was an associate coach. Goals against across the entire NHL, 2nd. Shots against across the entire NHL, 7th. Penalty kill across the entire NHL, 5th. Goals and shots for are tough. 24th in terms of goals for, 18th in terms of shots for. Wins, 16th. And of course, 2 Final Four appearances where they played lockdown hockey, only to be eliminated by the 2020 and 2021 Tampa Bay Lightning, who no one was going to beat. And the New York Islanders probably gave them the best run for their money. They could have won at least one cup, maybe even back-to-back cups, had that not been the team in their way. So here's what I see there. Lane Lambert teams usually have a good penalty kill. Lane Lambert teams usually don't allow a lot of shots against. Lane Lambert teams don't give up a lot of goals. Not when he's the assistant coach and not when he's the associate coach. How did he do as a head coach? I didn't even look it up because that's not his job.
So that's interesting. Not his job in Toronto, but that was his job in New York with the Islanders. And again, in the next segment, we're going to talk a little bit about that. Just want to wrap up some things I heard from the Steve Dangle podcast here. Again, penalty kill, defensive, all sounds great. Sounds again like for an associate head coach, an assistant coach, this is your guy. But when it comes to head coaching, which is what Lane Lambert is going to do for the Seattle Kraken, how did things fare? And I got to tell you, there's some things that our good man Gil Martin said years ago that I have concerns about. I've said it before, whether I'm squadcasting with Gil, on the Locked On NHL channel with Gil, there are some parallels at times that feel very real between the Seattle Kraken and the New York Islanders. And now we have a mutual. So what was Gil Martin's response when Lane Lambert was fired from the Islanders? We're going to talk about that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Kraken. For my everydayers, my first listeners, my OGers, someone that makes us our daily destination every day, thank you so much. Erica L. Ayala here, your host of Locked On Kraken. We're talking about Lane Lambert. I know I talked about him yesterday, and I talked about him multiple times in the last, 2 weeks, but it's official. He is our head coach. You heard from the Steve Dangle podcast on when he was going to Toronto, what Steve Dangle liked about Lane Lambert with respect to his roles as an assistant. You heard Steve was like, I didn't look at his numbers as a head coach because, well, that's not what he's doing. Well, I did take a look at the numbers. During his tenure as head coach for the Islanders, a 61-46-20 record. This is 2022-23 and 23-24 seasons. Goals for 487, 23rd in the league. Goals against 475, 15th in the league. Goals for per game or the goals for average per game, 2.97, 23rd in the league. The goals against per game The average 2.9, 23rd overall in the league. Power play 18.1% clip, 27th in the league. A penalty kill at a 76.8% clip, 24th overall. Not great. The only number that's not in the 20s is the goals against. That's the raw number. Also, 18.1% power play, the PK in that 2-year span. So some of this also, in fairness, is not exactly attributed to Lane Lambert, but the PK 76.8% clip, 24th overall. Both of those numbers, if you can even believe it, are less, right? They're lower than the Seattle Kraken in that span. But I told you, we're going to hear from Gil Martin. I think he has some great insight. This is the episode of Locked on Islanders where Gil Martin is talking about Lane Lambert being fired. And I've got this clip is holistically longer, but it's in segments because there are some things where I was like, wow, is this 2025 or 2023 or whatever it was? Very eerie, but let me know what you think. Heard Steve Dangle's clip. Now let's hear Gil Martin with Locked on Islanders.
Team just wasn't responding to Lane Lambert. And I'm not going to say Lane Lambert isn't a good coach. I'm not going to say, that he's incompetent. None of that is true. He's been in this league for quite some time. But the fact of the matter is that Lane Lambert, the team was no longer responding to what he was trying to do. And when a team continues to make the same mistakes over and over again, when you see the giveaways in your own zone, the failure to pick up players and allow them easy entry into the defensive zone, the just repetitive lapses in play where this team will play really well for 5-10 minutes, a period, sometimes even 2 periods, but then have such a terrible breakdown that clearly, something is just not going right, and anything they had is lost in the shuffle.
Well, I didn't love hearing that. Getting lost in the shuffle, not playing up to their potential. I mean, that sounds familiar. Potentially losing the locker room. The phrase Gil used is the team wasn't responding to Lane, making the same mistakes over and over. I said that a lot this past season for the Seattle Kraken. So that's a little concerning. I don't love that. But Gil, what else you got for us?
I don't blame Lane Lambert for trying to get more offense out of this team than what they had under Barry Trotz. I can't say I blame him for that. What this move by Lambert to try to generate more offense and to have the defenseman pinch, it undermined the defense without significantly moving the needle on offense. And the result is, 19 wins, 26 losses. Okay, 11 of those, you got 1 point. But, when you have an elite goalie like Ilya Sorokin, and he's facing so many shots that only the San Jose Sharks are facing more.
Didn't love hearing that. Do you remember my episode talking about Joey Decord? Didn't love that. But, I mean, there has to be a silver lining, right? Okay, so the team didn't respond to Lane Lambert, but you heard Gil Martin says, well, it's not that he's a bad coach. Okay, what he tried to do offensively cost on the defensive end. and created a situation where you have a goaltender that's being overworked by just shots on goal, let alone how many starts they get. Sounds a lot like the conversations I've had this past season about Joey Daccord and his usage, what needs to be done. I cannot take the defense that the Seattle Kraken historically has played. So I didn't love hearing that. And there's something else, though, that Gil Martin says on this episode, another theme that really caught my attention. And it's something that we've been talking about. Thank you all for those who respond in YouTube. I read some of your comments yesterday. And George, don't worry about it. I loved your comment. Go long. I love long form comments. I'll parse it down if need be. But just go for it, George and everyone else. But George, and others in the chat, just concerned about getting the right coach for this situation. And the situation, we all agree, is kind of bleak. So, what happens if this doesn't work out? Where does the attention, or really the blame, where does the blame go? Who is responsible? And Gil Martin, 2 years ago, had something interesting to say on that as well.
If Patrick Waugh also cannot get the most out of this available talent, between the cap limitations, between the long-term contracts for too much money and too much term that Lou Lamoriello has handed out to a lot of these players, the age of a lot of players on this roster, and the no trade clauses that Lou Lamoriello has given to almost half this roster, if you include limited NTCs, it is not going to be easy to make a lot of moves at the trade deadline. If this group, if Patrick Waugh, the coaching change, cannot light a fire under this group and get them to play well, the only other answer is that the team that Lou Lamoriello constructed is just not good enough to compete, and therefore you need to strip it down and rebuild. And it doesn't have to be one of those situations where the Islanders are, 31st in the league for 2 or 3 years to build it back up, because you have a core here of players who you can build around.
I mean, does that sound familiar? Does that freaking sound familiar? I've been telling you since before this past season that the things that keep me up at night about this Seattle Kraken team are maybe the things that happened at the front office level that now our coaching staffs are having to be responsible for. And just for those, who are keeping up, Patrick Waugh, still the head coach of the Islanders. Islanders did not make the playoffs. However, Islanders have a new general manager. So I want to amend, as we close today's episode, some things that I've been saying. What the situation potentially on the negative or unknown side is, if some of the things that I've been talking about, that a lot of people have been talking about, do not get fixed, not only do we have a situation where the Seattle Kraken might be looking for a new head coach yet again, because the leash has to be short. We keep hearing as soon as possible. We're not in a rebuild. We want to be competitive. What does that look like? What is the leash? What is the runway? Because again, I've been reading the comments. We'll get to some more throughout the next handful of days. None of us in the comments listening to Locked On Kraken, at least, believe that this is a team close to being a, quote, perennial playoff team. So now you have a head coach again in the hot seat before even starting. A guy that had trouble perhaps getting his players to respond, that at times, even though was great as an assistant with the penalty kill and defense, that was a weakness as a head coach. If Lane Lambert doesn't work out for at least 3 seasons, I can't imagine that he is the only person that the Seattle Kraken will have to let go. And we know Ron Francis got promoted, but all of this happening now, if it doesn't work out, it's kind of like when you're a pitcher, right? And you get taken out of the game, but there are still runners that you left on base. Those count towards your tab, your tally. But is that what we're seeing in Seattle? We don't know. The answer right now is we don't know. Early signs are pointing to this organization has actually told us that Ron Francis is their guy, and maybe everyone else just has to deal with the runners left in scoring position. That's our show for today. We are going to get into this so much more. Don't you even fret. But be kind to yourself, be kind to one another, and make sure we always hold fast, stay true, and we say, let's go Kraken. I'll catch you on the next episode. Peace out, everybody.